Greetings and salutations. This is Mike Cardoso with 305 Fights, where champions rise. I'm here with Mr. Ray Fundora. I'd like to say hi and welcome you to this podcast.
How are you, Mike? Good to see you.
Mr. Elio Tarago is not going to be in today. I'm going to be covering for him. I'd like to start with a little bio on Mr. Ray and clear up why they call you Ceviche and some of your training history and background. And yeah.
All right, let's start with the ceviche part. Before, years ago, I used to be a little bit heavier into competition. I would cut a little bit more weight than I should have. And I used to go on these raw food extremes, and I used to spearfish a lot. But whenever I went spearfishing and I wasn't able to hunt or catch anything, there was a young man that would come by the old Carlson Gracie when we were at the warehouses. Mm-hmm. He would come at noontime, which was competition training, and bring little things of ceviche. So I would go and I would get a whole bunch of them. And I would eat ceviche and fruit and raw vegetables, and that's how I would commit to my weight cut. And, you know, my friends would also get ceviche, especially if I made it after, you know, a good hunt. And ceviche, and there it goes. But I usually tell people, you know, man, what do they call you ceviche? Because I smell like fish when I swim, you know, just to like turn it into a joke.
Turn it into a joke, yeah. And then now you're teaching at the Carlson Gracie Academy, and you're also teaching at the Freedom Fighters, the formerly American Top Team Kendo. What's that like experience? How long have you been teaching there? And what's your previous martial arts background as well? Let me back up a little bit. What's your previous martial arts background? Origin and leading up to now?
The idea of martial arts came in later on in my life. Initially, you know, I wrestled some, you know, on the Verona, Nessa Verona. You know, kickbox with Martin the Swede in Douglas Park, you know, 20 plus years ago or more. I got into the idea of martial arts. This dear friend of mine, Apache, Arthur.
Apache,
I'm sure you know.
Kempo,
Black Belt, you know,
very familiar with him.
Verdesia, all these guys.
Ernie, yeah.
I remember I was 14 years old. I had just moved to Kendall, you know, and I never thought that, you know, that any of that stuff was real.
Would go anywhere. Oh, you didn't think it was real, like effective?
He was a little bit older. He was in his late teens or early 20s, early 20s, and he's getting your stance, and he just gave me this little leg kick, and that leg kick was like I still remember to this day, one of the most painful things that I have ever experienced.
Shocking if you've never experienced it.
I mean, it was, you know, down for the count. I was like, there's no way I'm gonna get up and double leg him and, you know, forget about it. And, you know, that started things rolling. And the concept of martial arts didn't come in.
This is before UFC.
Yeah, this is way
before mixed martial arts and stuff like that, yeah? Okay.
I was 14, you know, years old, just moved to Kendall from Little Havana. I remember in Little Havana, there was a karate school, and I would watch through the plate glass window and see those guys, you know, dressed, and they would,
It doesn't look like it would work, yeah.
Yeah, and I would go to my house and try. I'm like, man, this will never work until I got leg kicked.
Yeah.
And it was
enlightening, yeah, like
extremely, you know. Yeah. So then, you know, life happens, and I had my children and work, and you know, I was out of Miami for a while. I came back, and I was real busy with work, and my son, I had him wrestling with Verona, and I was so busy, and I took him to Michel Tubuyo, which is my professor. He's the head professor at Carlson Gracie. I'm an assistant professor to him at Carlson Gracie, Miami. And I almost gave him my son, you know, like, I need, you know, some help. I need him to, you know, do some martial arts. And he did, and I saw how, you know, how he excelled in all aspects of life, not just on the mat, you know, with BJJ. Wow. But I saw him compete, and I saw him, you know, lose in the competition, and there's no way that this can be so difficult. So I decided, you know, I would roll around in the no gi, and I decided I'm gonna put on a gi and see if this is really as
difficult
as it can't be, you know. it was a love-hate relationship initially because it was getting, put to sleep and having to check my ego every
Check your
single
ego
roll
at the door.
at the door and every roll because it was nonstop and the real concept of martial arts, not just the ability to break someone's arm, but to better yourself and your surroundings,
Yes.
getting rid of ego and just becoming a better human,
Absolutely.
started growing,
Growing.
you know.
And how did you? And then you went from a student. How was your progression from a student to a competitor to a coach?
Competing real fast.
Real fast.
Yeah, real
'Cause
fast.
you had previous experience wrestling and stuff, so it was.
I just wanted to
You just
compete
wanted
and
to do it,
see,
yeah.
and initially it was the first one, was
Gi tournaments, IBJJF style,
yeah,
Naga
gi,
style.
yeah, nagas, gi, all those, and it was kind of awkward at first, but I kind of, the la coquilla, those butterflies, I kind of like yearned for it, so
Yeah.
it was one to the other, and the weight cutting, the little bit of background in nutrition, and conditioning and all these things,
Were beneficial to you.
extremely beneficial. Some of the guys.
That's somewhat lacking in modern day, um, in the jiu-jitsu scene a bit more, I would say.
It's getting better.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting
But
better.
you agree it's lacking somewhat.
Yeah, I do agree. I believe conditioning is an integral part of any kind of competitive sport. And general health and nutrition has to be, prime, the, the most important thing.
Now, I was speaking to Master Elio Tarago just earlier when I was speaking to him, and we were discussing the conditioning. What do you feel for the competitors? What is important for them as far as conditioning as far as competing?
Well, you have the mental aspect of conditioning and the physical aspect. I believe in circuit training.
Now, the mental aspect of fighting, or the mental aspect of.
I believe it translates, Mike.
Okay, go ahead.
If you're 6 weeks out, 8 weeks out, and you're thinking that just by going to the regular gym and lifting old school weight training, that you're gonna harness that
Fighting
fortitude,
spirit?
that fighting spirit. That's a perfect
That's the
term
word you were
for it.
looking for, yeah.
So I don't think it'll
No.
happen. I think you have to go, do old school stuff. Go do your road work. Go do your track work.
Long distance, old school.
Long distance, old school, and circuit training.
Circuit training.
Big believer. Pick 6 different exercises, mix them up. Your body was meant to work as a unit. So things that incorporate from the toes, to the nose. Hinging movements. Plyometrics, calisthenics. Gymnastic style conditioning, sprints, drags. An upper body compound lift push, an upper body compound lift pull, plyometric sprints, carries, and static contractions. A mixture of all of that, because it imitates, what happens in a match.
Yes, I understand. And then we jumped onto that one, but we never got into your process of coaching and stuff.
I just I see the.
Did you see yourself ever coaching? Or
Not
just
it,
something that happened.
not initially, but there's something special. I mean, anybody that does martial arts is special in itself. It's a difficult path,
Very
But
difficult.
but then when you decide to compete in martial arts, it almost you go from being a small percentage to a minuscule percentage of, and I know the anxiety that it causes, and it doesn't matter if you've had 150 matches or your first match, you still have those butterflies and
That anxiety before the bouts it will either make you or break you.
right.
To be honest, and some people they use that anxiety and adrenaline, to almost harness like superpowers, and some people will. It's the flight reaction. Some people will just look for a way out. It's amazing how and it takes hard. And you do you feel the conditioning and stuff prepares that fighting spirit like we talked about for them to not break.
I do. I believe in that old the old adage, train hard, fight easy.
Yes.
Big believer in that. Big believer in sparring, conditioning, not overdoing it, but 2 to 3 times a week, and just leaving everything there.
Leaving everything.
Leaving
in
everything,
the
you know,
cage or
there.
in the ring. Yeah.
And just
And leaving everything in the cage and not leaving it to the judges, you mean?
no,
Or
never leaving it
just-
to the. Try never to leave it to the judges. You know, try to. You know, the spirit of jujitsu or martial arts is to either submit or finalize. Let's call that your opponent, not because you hate them, but just because that's what the sport
Yeah, it's a
aspect
martial
of
art.
martial arts
It's a martial
is.
art. It's a fighting art.
It's a fighting art. You know, 500 years ago, you would be trying to finish, like
Kill or be
Mortal
killed.
Kombat,
Yeah,
finish your
Mortal Kombat,
opponent.
finish.
Now it's become a sport. You know, there's a sport aspect to it. So, you know, but finalization is, you know, where it becomes a gentleman's sport, where you get the tap, you know, or you get the KO, whatever, whichever way it is. There's no finalization as it was 500 years ago, where
Yes.
you know your head would come off or whatnot.
Yes.
So,
But the preparation is kind of leading. You're mentally focused for that type of.
you're continuing on the same legacy that warriors
Absolutely.
back in the days. You're honoring them by finalizing, by committing to not just winning by a point or by a judge's decision. That's fair in itself. But the spirit of martial arts is to finish, you know, the battle, the combat sport, and finish it with a decisive blow or submission. A big believer in that. So I kind of push that always
To your
in my
students.
to my students in my training concept. Both of my professors are real
That's where
big
you
on
learn
that.
some of that.
Right,
theories, yes.
right. I've been blessed to have.
Now you have two instructors. You mentioned we discussed Buyo, which I don't know too much about Buyo and his history. I just know I know he's with Cross and Gracie team, and all of my interactions with him have been super pleasant. He's a very nice gentleman and martial artist, and I'd like you to discuss a little bit more about him and your interactions with him, and also with Manolo, which we didn't discuss at all, which is another very nice gentleman.
I've been blessed to have, in my opinion, the two greatest professors that someone that wants to be a professor or a martial artist could, a competitive martial could have. Buyo is a soft-spoken, you know, extremely polite savage. He's one of these guys that, you know, he speaks very softly, very well mannered, but when it's time to train, you know, it's I don't know what happened. Like, what is this? This is something. This was not the person that I was talking to a minute ago. He has a crossing. He started doing jujitsu in his early teens. Competed ever since from Brazil. A beautiful history with him, where once he got higher ranked, he would go and give of his free time teaching in the favelas, which are the impoverished neighborhoods in Brazil. Straight lineage from Carlson Gracie, Rodrigo Medeiros, Torco Albuquerque, Michel, Buyo, Porfirio. And then, you know, I continue, you know, the legacy, not the lineage after him. And he's created world champions, and he's created great human beings based on his concept of Bushido, you know, which he really lives to the best of his ability, and great role model, great professor, you know. He's an incredible family man, an incredible friend, and he is my brother, you know. Sometimes loyalty makes you more family than blood, and that's how him and I interact with each other.
Yeah.
You know, we've had our
Loyalty-
differences.
Loyalty is very important in martial arts. It's a bit lost
Right.
recently, it seems, but it's very important. And then tell me a little bit about Manolo, and tell me a little bit about Freedom Fighters, Carlson Gracie, and then now Unity Martial Arts.
Well,
Please.
Manolo Lopez is another, you know, barely speaks to anyone. His he has to be
He barely speaks to anyone,
he's-
I must say.
very quiet, very just the philosophy that Manolo. If Buyo taught me martial arts, Manolo taught me philosophy. The philosophy that I try to live every day. Manolo takes the concept of the perfect someone trying to become a perfect samurai, and kind of like streamlines it for you. He believes in competition. He thinks that combat sport is the most honest sport there is. You know, it separates the wheat from the chaff, no in between. His focus has always been in the striking arts and in MMA. I had always heard about his kickboxing, so years ago I was able to, you know, actually get to know him and start training under him, and you know, just as life progressed, I became his grappling coach, and I the BJJ grappling coach at Unity Martial Arts, which originally it was American Top Team. Um, the guys there were fighting all the American top team guys, so we decided to go with Freedom Fighters
And doing
because
well.
and doing well,
Yes.
you know, under Manolo's, you know,
Guidance.
tutelage, you know,
Yeah.
his guidance. Um, we
And
went
then
from
so you went to Freedom Fighters. Why the choice of Freedom Fighters, the name?
because with Manolo he has it was a special name for him because of the freedom aspect. He's a big believer in liberty, he and freedom. He comes from a communist country, where liberty, you know, the socialist communistic style, where freedom of speech is non-existent. You know, freedom of the press, all these things have to be done subversive. So he has that love of freedom, of equality, of true independence. So the name Freedom Fighters, but it's a very aggressive name. We've decided to have the MMA pro and amateur fighting team, kickboxers, and submission grapplers, BJJ competitors. But we've also decided to, you know, bring in, you know, the doctor, you know, the young teenager that wants to get in shape, the person that wants to learn how to kickbox, you know, or Brazilian jiu-jitsu or anything, the self-defense aspect of it. So we decided to, man, what name
Would be more.
would
Yes.
be, you know, good for us. So we decided in unity.
Yes.
You know, just it's just a beautiful word altogether, and
Yes.
it has a lot of meaning towards everyone there, and you know that's why, you know, unity.
Perfect, perfect. And then let's talk about you as being a coach, for clients. What was your not for advice as far as making weight, being prepared, being on time, just a physical preparation? What is like the process that you do with your client with your because you've taught very high level competitors in different stages from amateur all the way to pro and very high pro, elite level pro as well.
Well, sometimes you have to realize that if you missed your chance at doing any of this, that it's either, you know, you can either just quit off, forget it, or see that if you can try to make the next younger athlete, you know, be able to make it at the highest levels. Um, I, I, I've studied a lot of nutrition and preparation for it, tested it on myself, and applied it to amateur and pro fighters, and it's worked extremely well. Um, some of the stuff that we do for the weight cutting I don't want to call it secret, but it's you know, it's our style of cutting weight. But if anybody needs help, I'll always help them. Um, the fact that some guys would need to cut 30 pounds, you know, and they were, you know, 4 weeks out, and they needed to be healthy at the same time, um, and that continued. The same process doesn't fit for every body type, for every athlete. So it's been a learning process. Every time that an athlete makes weight, you know, I learn a little more, and so does the athlete. His ability to perform is so important. What's the point in making weight and
If you
going
can't
in there and
perform.
dying out, you know, 3 minutes in the first round, you know? So it's been an ongoing process and learning. My coaching, you know, I was blessed to have Buyo and see him how he teaches, and Manolo and see him how he teaches, and you know, I took, you know, the best from both sides and applied it to my own style of teaching, which imitates, you know, both of them incredibly. I believe that the psychology behind teaching is there's a time, you know, to give a little bit of props to the athlete, but not too much, you know. And there's a time to, you know, correct them in a fatherly way, sometimes even in a harder way. Being on time, eating correctly, living the proper lifestyle if you want to
This
be a
is what you wanna
competitive
do.
martial arts,
Yeah.
you know,
And
discipline.
what would be your suggestion to any upcoming fighters or students looking into competition? What would be your advice and thoughts on anything? Anyone listening?
It's a
It's a
long,
hard road,
lonely
right?
road.
It's a hard, lonely road.
It's
And
hard. Most of the people in your family will have difficulty understanding why, the level of anxiety you might have, or, why you're putting yourself through such stress, physical and mental and spiritual stress. I mean, if anybody has cut weight, you know how cranky you get when you're cutting out, foods, and add anxiety and life here in
and
Miami.
how would you suggest them to deal with the pressures of like from my own self competing? That was the hardest enemy, was the wait before, and that anticipation, and being in that locker room for hours before the bout. Your mind plays tricks on you a little bit, and just the waiting, and it's very difficult for the competitors, and it's something that people outside don't really see. There's a lot of mental preparation that needs to be done. What is your idea in coaching as far as that?
I'll tell you
Now,
what.
do you feel some fighters just have it and are naturally strong, or you feel it's something that you could teach?
Well, there's no perfect samurai, Mike. So even you can learn it, and some guys will learn it faster. But it goes right back to the application of your training, the intensity of your training. Of course, a week and a half before your competition, you should tone down your training. But you should make it a point to go at it, as hard as you can. Of course, trusting your training partner, so that there has to be a level of trust. One of the tenets of Bushido, trust, where you don't get injured. But you should train as hard as you can, condition yourself, and know this is the road that you chose. Either you're all in, or you shouldn't be here. There's people that I know, that there's no reason for them to be there. There's no reason. And other people just, they want to test themselves. And some people might not have a reason to be there at all, but the more that they're there, you see the change in them, where they become stoic. Almost, they harness the warrior that we all have in us, or most of us, and it becomes a lifestyle to them. And you see their nature change, and there's never a perfect samurai, but you see them become just better all around martial artists and humans.
Yeah, and let's talk about the benefits of martial arts in your opinion, as far as discipline, respect, honor, because those are things that aren't really talked about so much, as far as like mixed martial arts is, but those things are attributes that are taught. The martial art training is like a vehicle to teach those disciplines, like respect and loyalty and other things as well. What's
Well,
your idea on
well, the code, the Budo
the
code,
Bushido
Bushido, is honor, sincerity, duty, loyalty, heroic courage, compassion, and trust.
the seven
Not one,
virtues?
yeah, the seven virtues. Not one of those talk about breaking your partner's arm or your opponent's arm or winning a battle. Or it talks about these beautiful tenets, right? And these things, it doesn't matter what religion or what concept of God you have. These are things that are just good, you know. In Christianity, you have the same thing. In Islam, you have the same thing. In Judaism, you have. In Hinduism, is honor, sincerity, duty, loyalty, heroic courage, compassion, trust. You can be whatever you want, and that concept is good. We've labeled it Bushido since we're in the martial arts world. But that's something that I think that every human should have. And martial arts, jiu-jitsu in particularly, kind of is a vehicle to learn that mat. That mat is difficult. That gi is suffocating, and
It's
it breaks
suffocating.
down the ego.
Breaks down the ego,
That
and it
takes you
teaches
away from Bushido.
and it never gets easier.
No, it gets difficult. It's like,
It seems after 20 some years you'd think it'd get easier or
no,
something.
no.
Yeah.
Every day when I do gi and I put on my black belt, I don't think I still, man, yeah, so many competitions, yeah, so much stuff that I've forgotten and so much stuff that I've taught that I don't think I'm worthy of this black belt. What can I do better today to make this what the black belt symbolizes, which isn't just your ability to break arms or legs or feet, what the Budo part, the Bushido part of it, and the psychology and spirituality that goes along with it.
Beautiful. And now, what are your thoughts on where we're at now with the global pandemic and the state of martial arts? Let's go over the state of martial arts first, just like the academies and everything else. The training has been difficult, and then we'll discuss the competitions afterwards.
Well,
It's very difficult.
it breaks my heart to know so many dear friends of mine that and others that have small businesses and that I've seen
Struggling.
or worse,
Or worse. It breaks my heart to see, as myself, a small business owner, I own a martial arts school, and I'm barely making it by, but I'm making it by. But then when I see other studios and different, just any business I see because of this closing, it breaks my heart because I could imagine how much effort they put in, and something out of their control has caused them to lose it.
Sometimes we have to have faith in the sense of that the end will justify the means. Everyone will realize the importance of health, mental, spiritual, and physical, and that they develop some kind of plan to better their lifestyle. Because what's the point in social distancing and wearing, your face masks and the new normal and all that BS, and then as soon as you get home, you down a pint of liquor and you smoke a pack of cigarettes, and when you go out for breakfast, you swing by a fast food joint, and for dinner, you eat mac and cheese. Mac and cheese is great, but it cannot be a lifestyle. It has to, lifestyle is health, and
Yeah, and now how do you feel it's going to affect the martial arts as far as training, competition, and what about all events? What about 305 fights? What about UFC and other events? It's going to be difficult because there's no audience,
well,
and that's pretty much a staple of all fighting is a live gate, which is the people there,
what stinks is that once again, it's the small business owner that will be affected the most. IBJJF decided to not have any more shows, competitions for the rest of the year until further notice.
Same thing with all the other grappling.
All
Grappling competitions is closed as far as until further notice.
The UFC, which is the largest venue, they're being extremely careful. No audiences as of yet.
Extremely careful.
But they're able to stream their shows, and they have a high viewer rate that'll pay for the shows. What happens to the smaller shows? I think that as time progresses and fear subsides, things will become better. And I hope and pray that's what takes place. I think that a lot of people will either have to, stop being so scared and return to their normal way of life, or they have the right.
And then what about, and as far as the UFC? What you have any events coming up? Any fighters fighting in different events? Anything you'd like?
Well,
to,
as a matter of fact, Alex Bruce Leroy Caceres will be fighting Chase Hooper about not this Saturday, but the following Saturday. He's
he's been training with you guys again.
He came back home.
He was in somewhere. He was in Albuquerque or somewhere.
He was in
like
Arizona.
That? Arizona.
In Arizona, and he came back a few months ago, and he's been training, and he's a special one. His style, he's so well rounded. I know that his striking is
had like almost 20 fights in the UFC, I believe.
10 years worth of fighting in the UFC, and he's considered a striker, but people underestimate his floor. He's submitted just as many people as he's beat, with punches and kicks. His grappling is out of control, and his striking, streamlines right from Manolo, plus the oomph that a young man that with his ability has added, and he's an incredible training partner, incredible teammate, very special, and I think that will be a good one. I think that one is going to show the world his ability in all areas. You
Yeah,
know,
he's been with the UFC, but he hasn't had like a breakout performance that he needs. You know, sometimes you like Masvidal, for instance. He was in the UFC for many years, and he was just one of the guys there, and then suddenly he had his breakout fight. You know.
well, George is another one that he had his shot and he did it.
Seized the day, yeah.
Yeah, he did, and you know, George, from what I heard, is that he decided to put his mind on his money, and he took his training. You know, he went from 0 to 100 real quick. He's got incredible instructors and professors as well. And he decided to get it. Alex Caceres, Bruce Leroy, he's been in the top 10. I believe he made it to the top 5. But the UFC is not easy. I mean,
not easy.
It's not easy. There's 400 plus fighters, and 100 of them are getting kicked out every 3 months. You know, and to stay in it.
It's very difficult for him to stay in it for so long.
Right.
Is a huge accomplishment.
This is the upper echelon of the fight game. There's no other. This is top tier.
Yeah,
you know?
one small mistake when you zig and when you should have zagged, and you're suddenly waking up looking at the lights.
Right.
It's very difficult, you know. But any other closing statements before we get out? It's been a pleasure. I'm glad you came by.
It was so good to see you, Mike,
and
man.
catching up to you. I consider you a friend, and
Same here, man.
you know, and I look forward to discussing things more with you and talking.
I look forward to having you in one of my Friday night happy hour classes.
We
you know,
we haven't.
still-
We
you-
were going to, but then things happened, and then we haven't.
so glad to see you in the UFC.
Thank
You've been refereeing for so many years. I've seen you
Thank
in
you.
all the events, from grappling to submission grappling to BJJ to MMA, everything. And
Yes, I love. I'll referee anything.
I know.
Dominoes, backgammon, fighting. I don't care. I'll referee anything.
arm wrestling, the
Arm
works.
wrestling, bare knuckle fighting. That's the one I want to do next. You know, because I never have. I don't agree with the bare knuckle fighting. I think it's terrible. But if you're gonna have it, I want to referee it. You know, just to see what it is. You know, just to see what it's like. I never really understood. Because like 200 years ago, the boxing they were like that. They boxed bare knuckle and no protection, and
Yeah.
I still am confused by this fighting stance. I don't really understand why. I'd like for it to be clarified to me why this was the style previously. It had to do something with the bare knuckle, and then they opted to put the gloves on and to tape the hands and everything. And my knowledge of it was that was to protect the fighter's hand and this and that. But upon watching some of the bare knuckle fights, man, those lacerations that those fighters get is just too much. They need to go back to the gloves, you know.
Well, I mean, bare knuckle fighting is its own combat sport. It's becoming it's gaining a lot of hype. You'll see a couple of guys coming out of Unity Martial Arts doing it already. Gustavo Trujillo, Gerandi.
Okay.
He's up in Tampa, but he comes down to train with us all the time. You know,
Has he done it?
He's done it.
He did one of the fights in Tampa.
He's done a couple of them already,
Couple,
and one. No need for judges. Like he won, and we've had
That's a whole different other training and sport, really.
It's some serious
It's
boxing, some serious
serious
striking
boxing.
and dodging, and we had Francesco Ricci, one of ours, you know, a Unity Martial Arts teammate, you know, also do it and get a KO, and he's gonna do it again now, and so it is becoming a thing, and it is trained for, but we're also developing. How do you train for this besides
That's the
just
other
brawling?
question,
You know?
because this is a new training thing, shorter rounds, bare knuckle, holding and hitting, and so forth. It's a whole different thing.
It's dirty boxing,
Dirty boxing.
and I guess the karate mawaya, that rope thing where you hit training.
The makiwara.
The makiwara, yeah, doing that, you know. So we got all these things.
Yes.
It's a learning process. We're learning about that as we go.
Yes, yes.
No.
Well, it was a pleasure talking to you. I'm going to close it now with Mr. Ray Fundora. Did you have any closing statements?
Thank you, Mike. Good to see you, man. Good
Okay.
to see Elio and everyone else.
Okay, Mike Cardoso here with 305 Fights, where champions rise. Us.
Us.
305 Miami, the champion league.